The first thing that should make everyone sit up straight is the word disappearance, not crash, not shot down, not mechanical failure. When a U.S. drone vanishes near Iran's border under today's tensions, that's not an aviation story anymore. It's a political signal wrapped in silence. And right now, the silence is doing a lot of work.
Welcome to the We On podcast. We uncover the high-stakes drama unfolding in the Persian Gulf as U.S. surveillance drones fly over Iranian waters.
Reports are emerging that a U.S. Navy MQ-4C Triton, one of America's most advanced high-altitude surveillance drones, transmitted an emergency signal and then disappeared from radar south of Iran.
The chatter that has been circulating is that a U.S. unmanned aircraft lost contact during a mission skirting Iranian airspace, and that what should have been a routine intelligence run turned into a question. Did it drift? Did it get forced down? Did it get deceived? Or did it get taken? If we're serious, and we should be, then the first demand is simple. What model is reported missing, and what were its capabilities? Because the difference between a long-endurance, high-altitude surveillance platform and a more tactical armed drone changes everything about motive, risk, and escalation. A large maritime surveillance drone can vacuum up radar emissions and map air defense behavior from far out. A more tactical platform can linger closer, cue strikes, or feed targeting data. Either way, a sudden loss under suspicious conditions pulls the curtain back on a very specific contest. Can Iran deny eyes in the sky without firing a shot? And can it do so in a way that leaves Washington unsure whether it was outplayed, out-engineered, or simply unlucky? So when Washington asks, almost rhetorically, why haven't they capitulated? The answer is sitting right there. Because the strategy assumes fear is universal, and Iran is acting like it has immunized itself against that particular weapon.
I know that we have red lines here from the U.S. How about over with Iran?
The president asked me that this morning, and I don't want to use the word frustrated. It's almost because he understands he's got plenty of alternatives. But it's curious. He's curious as to why they haven't, I don't want to use the word capitulated, but why they haven't capitulated. Why under this sort of pressure with the amount of sea power, naval power that we have over there, why they haven't come to us and said, we profess that we don't want a weapon, so here's what we're prepared to do, and yet it's hard to sort of get them to that place.
Well, there's that.
Now, let's talk about what it would actually mean if Iranian electronic interference was involved, because this is where people get dramatic and start treating jamming like a magic wand. It's not. But it is absolutely plausible that a sophisticated defender can degrade, confuse, or even sever a drone's operating chain, especially if the drone is working close to contested airspace and relying on a mix of satellite links, line-of-sight data links, GPS timing, and onboard autonomy. One path is brute force disruption. Deny the drone clean navigation and clean communications long enough that it either aborts, drifts, or switches to fallback modes that are easier to predict. Another path is deception. Feed false positioning or timing cues, nudge the drone's logic toward the wrong, safe corridor, and force an error that looks like a simple operational incident until you realize it happened at exactly the wrong place and the wrong moment. And then there's the straightforward old-school possibility that never goes away: air defense. If a drone crosses a red line and Iran decides to make an example, the toolbox is not empty. The point isn't to claim certainty about what happened. The point is to understand why these matters. If a drone can be neutralized without a conventional dogfight, then the next drone showdown won't be about bravado. It'll be about who controls the invisible layer: signals, spectrum, guidance, and decision loops. And that's exactly why Hamidreza Moghadam Far, advisor to the IRGC chief, talking about readiness lands differently in this moment.
اینها پیغام بهشون داده شد اگر این بار مثل بارهای دفعات قبلی نیست که ما پایگاهتون رو در عراق و در قطر زدیم،
ما جنگ محدود
نداریم. اینجا اگه حمله کنین ایران به چندین کشور این پیغام دادیم، کشورهای منطقه، و اونا رفتن رسوندن
که آمریکا اونجا پایگاه داره،
که امریکا پایگاه، تمام پایگاهتون، تمام منافعتون تمام شرایط اقتصادی. شما ببینید اندال وقتم گذشته این ترامپ با این دامادش تو امارات و چند تا این کشورهای منطقه عجیب سرمایه‌گذاری شخصی کردن که اگر اینا از بین بره اصلا نابود میشن از نظر شخصی. اینا خیلی مهمه، مهمتر از مسائل امنیتیشونه. ترامپ اینجوریه. اعلام شد بهشون که تمام اینا مورد هدف ماست.
Before we go deeper, do me a favor. If you value this kind of straight, detailed breakdown without the usual spin, hit like, share this with someone who actually cares about what's real, and subscribe so you don't miss the updates that are still coming. It helps keep honest journalism alive. And it tells the algorithm there's an audience for analysis that doesn't treat you like a child. Alright, back to it. Because the drone story is only one strand of a much bigger pressure campaign, and the timing is not accidental. Here's the connective tissue. Drones don't loiter near borders in a vacuum. Their mission profile is usually a mix of surveillance. Here's the connective tissue. Drones don't loiter near borders in a vacuum. Their mission profile is usually a mix of surveillance, pattern of life collection, emissions mapping, and battle space shaping. If it's a high-altitude platform, it's often there to build a detailed picture of radars, air defense activation cycles, communications relays, and what turns on when certain aircraft appear. If it's a more tactical drone, it's typically there to watch for movements, launchers, fast craft, logistics convoys, dispersal activity, and to keep a constant feed that can be fused with other sensors. When you lose one, you don't just lose hardware, you lose continuity. You lose the uninterrupted stare that helps planners spot the one change that signals a coming drill, a mobilization, a dispersal, or a trap. Now let's pivot to diplomacy, because here's the uncomfortable truth. The military theater and the negotiating theater are the same stage, just different lighting. The latest reporting suggests talks could move again, conditional, time-sensitive, and framed like a final off-ramp before something uglier. Inside Iran, the political climate is clearly tense, and the campus protests matter for more than domestic reasons. Universities are not just places where dissent happens. They're places where a state's confidence is tested in public, where ideology meets reality, where young people pressure the narrative. When protests reappear at multiple campuses, it complicates the external pressure game.
نابت آوردی اینجا ما داریم میریم سر کلاس عین جنگ عراق بر علیه ایران که بچه‌ها میرفتن تو جبهه پشت سرش میومدن سر کلاس درس می‌کشن میگه ما تعطیل کردیم الان به مراتب قوی‌تر از اون موقع هستیم. این رو چه زمانی ما میتونیم بگیم آقا ما میتونیم دانشگاهمون رو حفظ بکنیم امورات مملکتمون رو بچرخونیم هیچ ترسی هم نداریم کسی بخواد مخالفت بکنه از بابت اینکه منطق باهاش برخورد می‌کنیم. پس ما باید نشون بدیم که انسان‌های منطقی هستیم میتوانیم آزادی رو تحمل بکنیم و میتوانیم برخورد درست داشته باشیم.
Which brings me to the negotiating posture and the messaging contradictions that should worry anyone who remembers how wars get sold. You're hearing claims attributed to key Trump admin figures like Steve Witkoff that Iran is weeks away from a nuclear bomb or a week away from something close to bomb-grade capability, and that framing is designed to create a sense of emergency.
You know, they say that it's all about their civil program, and yet they've been enriching well beyond the number that you need for civil nuclear. It's up to 60%. They're probably a week away from having industrial grade bomb-making material. And that's really dangerous. So they can't have that. This is something that they have to stick with until they prove to us that, they can behave.
But then you have the other side of the same political mouth, where President Trump, after the June bombing of Iran nuclear facilities, talked about obliterating Iran's nuclear program. Those two storylines don't naturally fit together. If Iran is truly weeks away, in the dramatic sense being implied, then you're talking about a scenario where intelligence certainty matters, where miscalculation risk is enormous, and where strikes don't guarantee anything except escalation.
For years, as they built this horribly destructive enterprise, our objective was the destruction of Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity and a stop to the nuclear threat posed by the world's #1 state sponsor of terror. Tonight, I can report to the world that the strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated.
If, instead, obliteration is being sold as a simple answer, then weeks away becomes more like a rhetorical accelerant, an urgency narrative that pressures allies, corners negotiators, and pre-frames any Iranian refusal as irrational defiance. And yes, we have a historical parallel that should be mentioned plainly, not as a lecture, but as a warning label. Iraq was also packaged with urgency, certainty, and the implication that waiting was irresponsible. The deadline psychology didn't just shape public opinion, it narrowed policy imagination until war felt inevitable. Now let's address a major allegation that's been circulating and treat it with the seriousness it demands without letting it hijack reality. The claim goes like this. Breaking. The U.S. will attack Iran by Tuesday. Former CIA officer John Kiriakou says, citing a former colleague recently inside the White House. He says the only officials opposing the attack are J.D. Vance and Tulsi Gabbard. If this were true, it would mean we're not watching a negotiation with military pressure in the background. We're watching a military decision with negotiations used as cover, leverage, or timing management. It would mean the proposal windows and final chances are less about compromise and more about building a record, so that when the strike happens, it can be said diplomacy failed.
I have a friend, former CIA officer, who was at the White House this morning talking to his friends, and he says that a decision has been made to attack Iran on Monday or Tuesday. The president yesterday gave the Iranians 10 days to accept our proposals for an end to their ballistic missile program, an end to their uranium enrichment program, an end to supporting groups in the Middle East like Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis. But he's done this before. Well, he'll give you 10 days, he'll give you 2 weeks, and then he'll just attack 2 days into it. He thinks that keeps people off balance. And so he said that there are battle lines, that the anti-war forces are J.D. Vance and Tulsi Gabbard. He said that
That's it?
That's it. He said the pro-war people are led by Marco Rubio and include Pete Hegseth, and now the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And I stopped him on that point this morning, and I said, wait a minute. I said, during the Iraq War, at the start of the Iraq War, the most stridently anti-war component was the Joint Chiefs of Staff. They were always the last ones that wanted to attack because they know what war is. And he said, but you forget, Trump has replaced all of the Joint Chiefs this year, in the past 12 months. Which I had forgotten. Any of these four-star generals who, had worked their way up through the ranks, but had served under Biden, he fired all of them. All of them. And he promoted people that he knew would be politically loyal.
Do you think this?
So how should people interpret it? Treat it as a signal about the information environment, not as a confirmed operational timeline. A real attack decision is rarely telegraphed with that level of specificity in public discourse unless someone wants it out there for effect. Sometimes leaks are real. Sometimes they're psychological operations. Sometimes they're ego and access games. The smarter question is, what behavior does this claim try to produce? Does it try to frighten Iran into concessions? Does it try to condition the public for escalation? Does it try to test reaction, domestic and international, so planners can calibrate? And if you're Iran, you don't respond to a rumor with panic. You respond with readiness and ambiguity. That's the core of deterrence. You don't let the other side write your emotional script. And this is where my perspective matters, because the West loves to present itself as the calm adult while it stacks aircraft and ships like punctuation marks. Then when Iran refuses to budge under threats, it's framed as provocation. But let's be honest, the pressure tactics are not subtle. The goal is to make Iran feel surrounded, watched, and economically strangled, and to make the public believe that capitulation is the only path to relief. Yet what the current moment is showing, again, is that Iran has built a political identity around not conceding under coercion. You can disagree with Tehran on 100 things and still understand this. A state that believes it survived decades of sanctions, Covert operations, assassinations, and sabotage is not easily spooked by an armada photo op. So when Washington asks, almost rhetorically, why haven't they capitulated? The answer is sitting right there. Because the strategy assumes fear is universal, and Iran is acting like it has immunized itself against that particular weapon. So, what happens next? If we're reading the terrain with clear eyes, expect more claims, more deadline talk, more high-tempo leaks, and more online noise designed to create an atmosphere where escalation feels normal. Expect the diplomatic process to be framed as perpetually last chance, because that framing is useful even when it's not true. And keep watching the technical layer. The drones, the electronic warfare contest, the pattern of surveillance flights, because that's where you often see the real temperature before the press releases catch up. If Iran can credibly make U.S. unmanned operations costly or unreliable near its borders, it strengthens Tehran's argument that coercion won't work. It tells Washington, you can posture, you can threaten, you can move ships, but you can't assume you'll operate on your terms at the edge of Iranian airspace. And to me, that is the heart of this story. Washington is learning, again, that fear is not an automatic currency it can spend to buy compliance. If the Trump-era posture is built on maximum pressure, plus the threat of force equals surrender, Iran's refusal is not just stubbornness, it's a strategy. It's a bet that time, regional complexity, and the costs of escalation will restrain Washington more than Washington's ships will restrain Tehran.